Hey guys, welcome to the next episode of the Rusty Beauties Restorations. So in this episode we continue with this overdrive swap, which we started a few videos ago. We took an A-type overdrive off our transmission. We figured out that it has way too many problems to be repaired. So for now we just put it to the side and we are replacing it with this J-type overdrive. But to do that we needed to swap the main shaft in the transmission from A-type to a J-type main shaft, and since we had the transmission apart, of course we are checking this and that. We found some issues with it. One of the gears on the countershaft was chipped. Also the bushing, this bushing on the second gear was snapped, which is a very common problem for the second gear bushing in these transmissions. So we changed that bushing, and in the last episode we assembled the countershaft and we put it in place, even though we're going to have to remove the spindle later and drop it down. I'm going to show you why later. And we also checked all bearings, bushings, measured tolerances, measured end plates, and now we are ready to start actually assembling the main shaft and the input shaft, putting all the cluster together, and then we can finish assembling the transmission. And then, only then, we can install the J-type on the transmission. So that's the idea. Let's get crack-locking. Alright, so let's start with the assembling. So this is our main shaft. Let's assemble our main shaft first. We're going to take care of the input shaft later. So we start from the center going sideways. So this is the front end of the main shaft, this is the rear end of the main shaft. And here we have all these parts that I put in the same order as they go on the shaft. So this is the hub that goes on these splines, and from here forward we have these parts, from here rearwards we have these parts. We're gonna make sure that everything is cleaned and lubricated before we install it. So first of all we have this adjuster washer, they call it. So these come in different thicknesses, and if you've watched the last episode you will see how we determined that this is the right thickness. We made sure that this is our correct thickness in order to have the correct end plate here within tolerances. So we already measured that, we don't need to do that today, we just assemble now. So this washer has a channel here, if you see on the side, a scroll or channel. This goes towards the gears, towards the front. So we're just gonna put some assembly lube on it. Oh my god, my assembly lube is thick. Before we start assembling though, something very important I was gonna forget. We need to make sure that all the oil passages are clean. There's nothing in them. So there's an oil passage here, and there's an oil passage right here at the end, on this J-type shaft specifically. On other types of shafts there are even more holes. On this A-type shaft you can see there are even more holes. So it is important to make sure that they're clean, because if it's sat for a long time somewhere, it's possible that it's full of debris, and even bugs sometimes go in this. On this one there aren't many oil passages, but still there are some, and we need to make sure that they're clean. So this oil passage here is clean, and that's all for this particular one. But again, if you're doing non-overdrive main shaft or you're doing A-type main shaft, make sure that you check everywhere all the passages. So now we can take our adjuster washer, put it here again with the channel facing the gears. Next we're gonna put our second gear. Again, we're gonna clean it. Like this. Make sure that there are no debris anywhere on the gear. On the gear there's also an oil passage. Where is it? Here. There's this oil passage, you have to make sure that it's open. That brings oil to the bushing inside. And once we make sure that it is okay, we can assemble it The reason why we're using this assembly glue is because it's thick and it stays where we put it. If we use oil, it will leak. It slowly will leak down, and it's not going to stay where we put it. But with this glue, it stays. Mine is thick because it was cold in the garage at night, and now it is pretty thick, but that's fine. So that's how the bushing goes, with the flange stays on this side. Okay, so now we have lubrication all over the place there, and now the bushing goes with this end towards the spacer, towards the adjuster washer, like this. And the flange of the bushing remains on this side between second and third gear. I'm going to put my assembly glue in front of the heat so it warms up a little. Now we're going to clean our third. Now we have grease on the shaft, but I'm going to put grease on the outside of the bushing too. Now the grease feels better because I put it in front of my heater, the glue or whatever it is. And then the gear with the flat part towards the bushing of the second gear, like this, all the way. Then we're going to put some glue here as well. Then this washer, we're just going to clean it. It goes in this direction. Again, it has a channel here for oil to travel through. This goes towards the gear, and the dished part goes to the front. And now we can put our lock washer, our circlip. That's going to be really tricky again. Maybe we should do that on the vise. Okay, that's going to be tricky. Okay, now tap it down. Okay, so here at the front, what's left is the hub, but we're going to take care of it at the end. Now though, we're going to have to install this hub here so we can start assembling the rest of it. So this hub, we're going to take it apart and clean it first. Alright, so I cleaned it, and these are all the parts. We have two new synchro rings. If you want to know what actually a synchro ring does and how to check if it is worn or not, you have to see my other video where I explain that. I'm not going to talk too much about the synchro rings here. I'm just going to show you how to assemble them. So this hub doesn't have a direction. Whether you put it this way or this way doesn't really matter. So I'm going to put glue inside the hose and on the splice. Then we're going to put the springs in and the bolts. And since the hub doesn't have a direction, doesn't really matter how we put it here. We just need to make sure that all three bolts are there, and we're going to push them in. There you go. Make sure that it goes off and back in the center. Perfect. So our hub is assembled. Now here we're going to put grease again. I keep calling it grease, it's glue. And on the other side. And this is where our synchro rings go. You see they have three tabs. They go into the three holes here. So they have a little bit of play. That's normal. the other side as well. And we have our synchro hub assembled. Now before we put it on the shaft, we're going to put some grease, some glue here as well. Now it is important though, because the hub itself doesn't have a direction, but the ring on top has a direction, and the direction is with this channel, which is for the fork for the selector. This channel goes towards our second gear. Now we have to match the splines. There you go. So now here on this side we have another adjuster washer. I'm going to put some glue there as well. This adjuster washer doesn't have a direction, doesn't have a screw on one side, so it doesn't have a direction. But again, it comes in different thicknesses, so you have to make sure that it is the correct thickness, so you have the correct end plate here on this side of the shaft. Then we have our bushing and our gears again. I'm going to clean them. This bushing again, you see, so the channel on this bushing is a little bit further out, and it matches the oil passages on the gear. So this is the direction for this bushing. But first we're going to clean it. And since our gear goes this way, with this teeth toward the synchro hub, our oil passage is here, then our bushing should go this way with the short side forward. Nice. More glue on it. And now we should clean the gear and put glue on it as well and install it. You see how I leave the cleaning part for the last. I don't clean all my parts together and then at the end just assemble them. The glue, the grease and everything is attracting dust. If they sit for 2-3 days here on the bench after they've been cleaned, they're gonna get contaminated again. So I'm cleaning them just as I am assembling them. So now it goes on top of its bushing again in this direction. That's it. We have another adjuster washer here. And the washer. And now here we're supposed to install our bearing, a washer on the outside of the bearing, and our circlip, and our circlip is going to end up right here. But we're not going to do that, because if we do it now, we're not going to be able to install it in the housing. So we're going to leave this for now. We're going to prepare our other hub. So before we assemble it, I want to show you something here. This hub, unlike the other one, has a direction. So you see this end here is protruding a lot, and this end is sunk in. So it is very important to put it in the right orientation. This one is the right one, with the protruded part towards our input shaft. Because you see here, there's room for this protruded end to go into the shaft. You can put it the other way around too. That doesn't make too much of a difference. But here, on this side, if you put it this way with the protruded side towards our third gear, it won't allow it to go all the way in. If we put a synchro ring on it and we go this way, you see the synchro ring has a lot of play here, and the hub, no matter how much we push, won't compress it towards the third gear because this protruded side is holding it. But if we flip it around and we go this way, now our hub can push firmly against the gear and lock it. So if we come this way, now the gear will spin. But if we push hard on it, now the gear won't spin. So that's important to know. This ring though doesn't have a direction. So it doesn't matter how we assemble the hub itself, but it matters how we put it on the shaft. Perfect. So now we can put some glue. Our synchro rings, so the protruded part towards the input shaft. There you go. Okay, so we are back on this bench now, and we're gonna put some glue on the gears on the countershaft, just so they don't run dry. We put already on the spindle, we put glue, and as you notice here now, the shaft is on its spindle, so we can spin it and everything. Unfortunately though, we can't keep it there, because with this shaft in place, we're not going to be able to install our input shaft. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So this is our input shaft, and when we try to install it from here, this gear is on our way. So unfortunately, before we install our input shaft, we're going to have to remove the spindle from the counter shaft, drop it down, assemble the top end, and then we're going to have to figure out a way to put back the spindle inside the counter shaft. But for now, we're going to keep it assembled because it's easier, and at least the thrust washers on the side are going to stay where they are, and we're going to try to keep the shaft off the spindle for a short period of time as possible. And I know that it's going to be tricky to put it back on, but we're going to figure it out. Here we have cage bearings on the side, so we don't need to have a dummy shaft inside. In some cases, if you have roller bearings, then you need to have a dummy shaft inside to keep them in place. But here it's not needed. Okay, so we have everything here. We have our reverse idler gear installed. Make sure that we have everything there before we install our cluster, because after that we're not going to have access to all this. Anyway, so now let's install our main cluster here. Now, some people run a wire here through the hubs and everything to make sure that they stay together as they are installing them, and then they pull the wire out. I will try without. I might regret it later, but I'm pretty confident that I can do it without running a wire. So let's try. All right, so now we make sure that we have this washer here, because it's possible that we lose it on the way. Ours is there, so there you go. I didn't need a wire. So now our bearing comes in place. Then we have another washer at the end and the circlip. And the bearing goes this way with this circlip to the outside. It goes from outside. And now this is the tricky part here, to put it all together. So I'm going to try to tap it gently until it starts. Hopefully it's going to go. It's actually going. And now once it comes to a point where it can start going on the casting as well, we can tap it gently on the casting too. There you go. Like, have in mind that I'm tapping it really gently here. So here what we can do is we can take something like this. In this case I can take this discarded gear that is with the broken tooth, the one that we replaced on the counter shaft. I can put it this way. I can actually put it on the vise like this. Okay. And now the weight of the whole entire gearbox is what is pushing the gearbox onto the bearing, and we just need to tap a little bit on this end of the shaft, the top end of the shaft, so we can push the shaft on the bearing. And I'm going to use the back of this rubber hammer to put on the shaft, and with the other hammer I'm going to tap it down to. how far we are. But I think we are far enough because here we have enough space for this washer and for the circlip to go in its channel. Okay, it spins. That's how I check circlips. If they spin nicely inside their channel, this means they are in the channel. So with the main shaft, with the main cluster, we are ready. Everything is in place. It should spin nicely now. There you go. Good. So now we only have to put our input shaft. Okay, so let's get our input shaft ready to be installed. And by getting it ready, I only mean replacing the bearing, even though I don't see anything wrong with this bearing. But when I was diagnosing the transmission, there was some crunchy noise coming from this end, and I thought it might be this bearing or this bearing inside, and I decided that I would change them both. So I bought them, and now that we're here, they don't seem to be bad, but since we have them, let's change them. So we have this little one and the big one. Perfect. It comes with the circlip, which is good. So we just need to take this one out. There's a washer here. Now I'm assuming this one is going to give us troubles. But since it's an old one, I don't really care about damaging it too much. So I'm going to try to tap it on the vise. Now normally you wouldn't want to do this. You don't want to push on the outer racer if you want to take the inner racer out, right? But since this is an old bearing, I don't really care. We're going to be replacing it anyways. It doesn't move. Okay, then we're going to have to try it on the press. Okay, again, I'm only doing it this way because I know that this bearing is going to be discarded. But if I want to keep this bearing, I shouldn't do it this way because that will most probably damage it. There you go, it's going out. Okay. So here, there's also an oil thrower. Careful not to lose it. Needs to go back. All right, so here's our new bearing. I just cleaned it a little bit, made sure that the oil thrower is still there. There's another oil passage here. I made sure that it's clean. It comes to here. So I blew through it, and now the oil thrower and the bearing go like this. That's the new bearing. And now what we can do, in theory, I'm not going to do it, but in theory, we can take this discarded gear again with the chip tooth. We can put it like this, flip this upside down, and press it on top. However, there's a possibility that this oil thrower ends up in the wrong place because you see, it has a bigger diameter than the shaft, and the gear here is not flat. It has this bevel, I think it's called. I don't know what it is called. And the oil thrower needs to be installed just like this. If it ends up like this, when we push it down, it's going to be a problem. So that's why I'd like to put it this way to make sure that it's in place and push the bearing on top. Now I can put the bearing with the circlip up. That's not going to work. So we're going to have to figure out something else. But this pipe, no, we can't use this pipe. We have to find something to put here. Look what I found. The broken bushing. Then this pipe. Now it can fit better there. We just need to get creative here. And then we can put this plate on top. Okay, we made some stuck here. Let's see if it is gonna work. Okay. Okay, we have to make sure that it is all the way in, otherwise our washer and circlip won't fit. Okay. Okay, so now we have here enough room for the washer and the circlip. We are done here. There you go. Then our circlip. And if you don't press it enough, your circlip is not gonna fit. Mine fits perfectly. It spins in its channel. This means that we are all the way in. So now we can take our new bearing and install this on the transmission as well. So now this is where our input shaft needs to go. And as you can see, the countershaft, the gear on the countershaft is on our way, unfortunately. So that's the reason why we need to drop the countershaft down by pushing its spindle out again. And yes, unfortunately, we have to pull it out completely. I know what you're thinking. Maybe if we can not drop the whole shaft, only the front end, but no, it's gonna have to go all the way down like this. And our spindle is out. Now we shouldn't forget our bearing to go on the end of the main shaft. Then some go on this bearing. And on this gear. And now the shaft should go fairly easy. Okay, and we go all the way until our circlip on the outside of the bearing hits. Okay, so far so good. Now, what the biggest problem for me is to put the countershaft back in place. Now remember, the countershaft has a direction, so we will make sure that we don't put it in the wrong direction. This notch needs to be on this side so it can be locked with this plate and this screw together with the other shaft. So let me show you here. If you look inside the hole, you can see it needs to go up just by 1/4 inch or something. So I'm gonna try to put like a screwdriver or something to lift it up and hopefully keep it up until we can put the spindle inside. So I'm gonna take this long screwdriver and put it through the other side. Like this. Yeah, I think now we should be able to push the countershaft in. There you go. Wow, that was easier than expected. Now here the thrust washer was a little bit lower, but I was able to lift it with my finger. Maybe if I lift it this way. Let me try. Then we're gonna put it upside down. It is the thrust washer that is playing games with me. I think it went in place. Yes, there you go. Perfect. All right. That was the hardest part, but it's done. Great. Now we're gonna come back to the other side, but first I want to secure these shafts before we lose them again. So there's this plate that comes here, like this. And they need to turn into the right orientation. Maybe that's gonna help. It did help. Okay, so I'm gonna clean this screw and I'm gonna put a thread lock on it. We don't want to lose it on the inside the transmission, right? That would be a disaster. even though it doesn't have anywhere to go because it gets trapped inside here, but still it needs to be tight. Okay, and now what's left on this side is we have to clean this and put gaskets because they installed it without gaskets before, and this as well. There is a seal inside. We're gonna take this seal out and we're gonna replace it. We're gonna clean this surface and we're gonna assemble. There you go. Seal for the gearbox or steering box. Oh, I didn't know that it was the same. Okay, let's go to the press and push it in. I put some assembly glue on the seal, and in the past I made this on my lathe. I think I even showed it in video. It fits perfectly inside here, so we're gonna use that to push the seal in. Again, the seal goes with the open part towards the oil. So the oil is inside, this is inside, this is our outside, right? So this is how the seal goes. Actually, to start it, I'm gonna put something flat. I'm just gonna put this flat on top of it because it's gonna make it start easily. Okay. Yeah, it's halfway in. And now we can use this. Okay, that's all the way. And it's in. So let's first install the small one. And I'm gonna use this Permatex Forma gasket, which if you watch my videos, you know I swear by this. It's by Permatex, it's called Aviation Forma gasket. And I like it so much that I even eat it for breakfast with my donuts and my pancakes. Just kidding you. So I'm gonna put Forma gasket on the entire surface here. Both sides of the gasket. But I'm also gonna put gasket maker on the actual cover. And then we're gonna put it in place. And here, because the hose, all these 6 holes are true holes to the inside of the transmission, we have to use copper washers because otherwise we might get oil leak out of there. And then we're gonna do the same with the upper, the bigger gasket. And now, before I put the gasket, I want you to see here there is a hole. I think it is a return hole, I don't know, but this needs to match this little hole on the side. So you see, this little hump here needs to be to this side. I'm not really sure what this is for, but that's how it goes. This way. So now we can put the bolts and we're done on this. Well, it looks like my battery died and I assembled here the clutch release bearing and the shaft and everything, but unfortunately I didn't film it, but it is pretty straightforward. The shaft goes this way and we have the locking pin underneath, which is very important. This pin sometimes snaps, but this one that they used here was a heavy duty pin, so I reused it. And I run a wire here so it doesn't unscrew itself. I put a little bit of grease here on the sleeve so the carrier for the clutch release bearing slides nicely, and we are done on this side. So now, if this was a non-overdrive transmission, we were supposed to install our tail here on the back, and I don't have one to show you, but so the tail bolts together here with this, with a gasket of course, and the tail has a bearing at the end and a seal, and then you have a flange for the drive shaft and it gets bolted there. However, you know that here we're going to be installing a J-type overdrive, so we're going to have to install this adapter plate which goes like this. It's dirty, so I'm going to have to clean it, but it goes like this. For the top, we have to install our rails here. I have a video about working on one of these. I might put a link here so you can see it. These are the two forks that go into these grooves, and they move the rings that select the different gears. There's also this lever here that engages with this lever for the reverse. So when you're assembling it, you have to pay attention, make sure that the two forks go in their channels, and also this little, what should I call it, like a tab, goes into the lever here for the reverse, and then you install it with a gasket, and that's how it goes. However, I'm not going to install this because it's going to be on the way for installing the overdrive. So that's what we're going to be doing in the next video. I'm going to install the J-type overdrive finally into this transmission. So stay tuned for that. And with that said, we're going to end this video here because it's way too long, but it's an end of a chapter about assembling the transmission itself. And we're going to continue with the overdrive installation in the next one. So thank you for watching, guys. Thanks for commenting and subscribing. Thanks for supporting the channel financially through Patreon and PayPal. It's highly appreciated. If you aren't supporting the channel financially and you wish to do so, you can follow the link in the description, and that can take you to my Patreon page, and you can see there are 3 different ways of supporting the channel. If you want to do just one-time donation, you can send PayPal transfer to my email address, which is elin.yakov@rustybeauties.com. But if you prefer not to support me financially, that's still okay. I'm still thankful that you're around watching and commenting and sharing my videos. And just by watching the videos, you're still supporting me financially, which is highly appreciated. The financial support through Patreon or PayPal is only if you feel like saying, thank you, Elin, I really appreciate your videos and stuff like that. But again, it is not buying you anything. Everybody has the same access to all my content. At the same time, there's no early access, there's no VIP videos. Everybody has the same privileges and the same benefits, whether they support the channel financially or not. So with that said, let's end this video here, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.